Maridula Simanet, Doni Poinavolinet, Pina sans mi manisette, Dana fond sur le banc.
It's been years since I played a game that's evoked so many differing feelings in me than Silksong. It's a game that takes many creative risks and deviates from the Hollow Knight formula. It could have been so easy for Team Cherry to play it safe and to make Hollow Knight 2. It's clear they made the game they wanted to make with little outside influence. The more I played, the more it became clear why the game took so long to come out, memes aside. Some of these creative changes I was unsure of at first, but won me over, like the crest system. Others, like its overhauled currency system, I had wavering thoughts on throughout. Sometimes I gelled with it, other times it felt like they crossed the line of tension and end up in the realm of frustration. Same case goes for the bumped up difficulty. Silksong does not mess around. It wants you to play by a different set of rules. The sooner you drop those old Hollow Knight habits and get on Silksong's wavelength, the better. While in many cases it works well, there are stretches where that bump in difficulty can feel artificial. The higher damage output from enemies and larger enemy health pools feel excessive. The game has a certain bag of tricks it likes to go to more than it should for challenging the player. I've seen Dark Souls 2 thrown around discussions. As cliche as it can feel appropriate at times with how it approaches difficulty. What makes it frustrating is how it's such a notable mark on such a great experience. When Silksong is firing on all cylinders, it's sheer bliss and tops what they did with Hollow Knight. For large stretches of the game, this is how it is. The wait was worth it. One of the best games to come out in years. A more than worthy sequel. But there's small frustrations that add up in certain stretches that go beyond the realm of adding tension and turn to frustration. Team Cherry mentioned they had so much fun making the game, they had to decide to stop at some point and release it. The sheer scope of Silksong and how much they tucked away is staggering. And while the game gets compared to Dark Souls 2, I do feel more Elden Ring on this front as far as scope. There's so much tucked away, but I can't help but feel if they chopped down a little bit on the map, along with enemy health bars, the game would have had a tighter experience. There is more than enough here that will keep you playing until the end. I'm not one of those whole dollar value of a game by hour, but you'll more than get your money's worth with how much there is within Silksong for its low price point. Of course, they plan on adding further content like they did with Hollow Knight. Part of me wonders if some of these stretches never made it into the game itself, or had maybe more time and added in later. Only a few, but ones that, at the moment, do drag the game down. I'm as curious as how Team Cherry patches the game moving forward as I am with future added content. There are going to be some tweaks here. To note for this video, everything here was before the first patch. Some criticisms I bring up are getting addressed by it. Some things will no doubt change over the course of time. But I'm also curious what Team Cherry decides not to change. As of writing, we're still in that early phase of the game. How much will Team Cherry change versus how much they expect the players to change and adjust? It's one I'll be keeping a close eye on. Couple of notes before beginning. Up until now, I've kept the footage to the game's earlier stretches. This will be a spoiler-filled review, not as much on the plot, but of what will come across in their travels. So there's your warning moving forward. As well, special thanks to the Boulder Punchers who give extra support to the channel through Patreon, YouTube memberships, or one-time donations. Your support means the world. Check the pinned comment or description for more info. With that, let's dive into the world of Farloom. Team Cherry once again knocks it out of the park with its presentation. Some of the most distinct and drop-dead gorgeous art direction for a series in recent memory. Even if the game can get the blood pressure rising with its difficulty, it was always nice to slow down at times to take in the world of Farloom. I love the detail in Hunter's March, where bugs will come out to carry away the corpses of fallen foes. The Hollow Knight series is one of the best examples in recent memory of showing how art direction will always triumph over graphic fidelity. In every background, in every movement, in every enemy, you could see how much heart and soul went into creating this world. The same case for the sounds of Silksong. Composer Christopher Larkin returns with another phenomenal soundtrack. Stellar work all around. With a world focused on faith, you could hear elements popping up in its music, especially the Citadel stretches. I did find it amusing that one of the most ethereal, beautiful tracks is for Bilewater. Don't worry, we'll be coming back to Bilewater later in the video. Silksong, like Hollow Knight before, is able to convey so much life in its characters with its use of sounds. Those sim-like voices, for lack of a better term, do wonders. Hornet, contrasting with the knight from the first game, has a voice. You do have the option of turning her voice off. I did wonder going in if I would make use of this option, but I never did. I never found it to become annoying or distracting. Although it's too bad they dropped her Shaw and Get Good sounds, unless I missed them buried somewhere within, because my goodness, does Silksong have much buried within. Silksong continues with the excellent use of audio cues for its massive enemy roster, not only to give them character, but to help you in dealing with them. Whenever I would encounter a new boss or enemy, I take my time to get a feel for their attack patterns, not only in visual cues, but the audio cues associated with each attack. This is an element that Team Cherry has a rock-solid understanding of, and somewhat of a lost art these days. We process and react to sound faster than visuals. As attack windows can be so narrow, that recognition of what's coming next through an audio cue can make the difference between a hit and a dodge. Try a boss fight with your eyes closed. You may surprise yourself at how well you can react to what's coming once you have the pattern down. Of course, we also have the many NPCs we will come across. Combined with their appearances and animations, their sounds round out who they are as characters. They're brimming with life in such an economical fashion. Before even reading what they have to say, we have a solid idea of who they are. Sherma being the perfect example. Here's this humble pilgrim, clanging away while singing that tune of his. And yes, I did also think he was a girl at first, which seemed to be quite common, but within a few seconds, I was already invested in Sherma and how his journey would unfold over the course of the game. I'm sure many of us were dreading the possibility of another Mila-like situation here with Sherma. Another great use of audio comes from Chakra, the Cornifer equivalent of Silksong. Exploring a new area, trying to find my way around, there's always so much relief to hear that singing of hers. Well, assuming I had enough rosaries to buy a map off of her, but hold that thought for now. A traveling warrior from a distant land, that song of hers says so much about her and her people. And the contrast when she locks into combat should enemies approach or if she joins you in a combat gauntlet. The element of audio cues is something I don't feel Team Cherry gets enough credit for. As said, it could be a bit of a lost art these days, but it can be used to evoke so much in the player, even with but a simple chant. You hear Chakra, you could feel that wave of relief washing over you for getting access to a map. Speaking of maps, my goodness, mapping out Farloom is quite the ordeal. This world is enormous. Now I could see why Silksong took so long to come out. When I thought there wouldn't be anything more in certain directions, turned out there would be a new area, and then another one after that. And once you start unlocking new abilities, the world is your oyster, a staple of any metroidvania. Keep moving forward or head back to past areas that you can now access. See what's awaiting you for that area you marked down on your map. A brief note on the map markers, unless I missed an encounter with Chakra along the way, it was a bit annoying to have only access to 3 map marker types for a good stretch of the game. She did sell more later, when I would have loved to have them far sooner. I like to associate each one with certain roadblocks, like a double jump with a certain mark. There could be overlaps as a result and had to make note of it on paper, and that could add out with how much larger this world is compared to the first game, but that's a minor quibble. With its size and layout, I'm curious to how others had tackled the world of Farloom. I'd be curious to sketch out how my path looked, heading back to past areas on the regular with new abilities before trekking forward from where I left off. Revisiting a past area taking me in a whole different direction and place altogether. I love how you can reach the Citadel kicking off Act 2 from the east. I did the quote-unquote critical path way from the west, fighting the last judge to gain access. But you can arrive from the east past Sinner's Road through the mist and defeating Phantom to enter the Citadel. I'm not much of a follower of speedrunning, but I am curious to see how Silksong speedrunning will progress with how many options you have. As of right now, the current record is a little over 1 hour. And despite how large the map of Silksong is, beyond a few exceptions, it has the right balance of allowing you to warp around. You're never too far away from the Bell Beast, or if you're in the Citadel, an elevator to take you around to various locales. This is an issue I had with Hollow Knight, where backtracking could be a bit tedious if needing to hop around locations. Silksong does a better job in reducing the tedium despite its size increase. Of course, I have to make note of the Bell Beast. A great usage of a classic gaming trope, a boss that turns into our most loyal companion afterward, and once again with such great usage of sound design, art, and animations to convey her character without a word. More so than other characters as the Bell Beast doesn't speak. There's always a relief to unlock a Bell Beast location, again assuming I had enough rosaries and go through the process of summoning her, which is quite the ordeal. Another addition to help reduce that tedium is the dash. Not the single dash, but the addition of a hold to dash. It's common for metroidvanias not to have a hold to dash. Super Metroid got it right back in the day, but many don't offer it. If you want to move through areas faster, you're hitting a button over and over to move faster. And you could still do that in Silksong. Once I got that claw line later on, that was my go-to for moving through areas faster and through the air. But still, it was so nice to have a hold to dash if I wanted to move through past areas at a faster rate. Yes, Silksong does take this into consideration with making stretches longer on the horizontal axis. But even then, that feeling of dashing through does wonders in keeping that feeling and actual backtracking to something lower than the first game, even if the map itself dwarfs the original. And even with that dashing, it's not a free ride through these sections. You have to keep your eye out for traps and running into enemies. These enemies we'll encounter in Farloom, they don't mess around. They can hit like a tank and take damage like one. I'm not sure if they're built different compared to the ones in Hollow Nest, or if Hornet doesn't hit as hard as the Knight did, or the trip on the way over did a number on her, or a combination of the above. Whatever the reason, Silksong has a significant bump in its difficulty compared to the first game. It's been by far the most discussed element of Silksong on several fronts. But before we dive into the difficulty, let's talk about the changes to combat. For the first stretch of Silksong, I wasn't sure what to make of the changes compared to the first game. Two notable elements being the charm system and the healing system. Two systems that added plenty of depth and decision making in Hollow Knight. Charms gave you plenty of options and trade-offs in customizing how you want to play. Some charms offered greater benefits for the cost of more notches. Depending on the scenario, the location, or a boss, you had countless combinations to tackle challenges. Whether you want something that favored spells, melee strikes, or defense, there was much decision making provided by the charm system. Healing was very much a risk-reward system. Hold still and heal one mask, but hold even longer to heal further. Of course, this left you wide open for attacks. With healing windows razor thin, this was always such a delicate balance. Is now the time to heal? Should I use my soul now to heal or use a spell instead? Do I have the time to heal more than one mask? A simple system, but adds so much to the dynamic of combat of Hollow Knight. I can't recall how many times I ended up on the side of punishment trying to push my luck with healing. Silksong on the healing front takes a different approach. Instead of a one mask heal and holding for more, it's one holding window that heals 3 masks, all at once. Before upgrades, this requires all of your silk. Unlike the Knight, Hornet can heal in the air as well. Something that took me a while to adjust to. I still had that Hollow Knight instinct of needing to be on the ground to heal. As a result of this change, there were far fewer cases of pushing my luck for healing. There's still that risk reward, and you still need to find those healing windows. But it's not like how razor thin it was in Hollow Knight. It's a more merciful system, but there's a reason for it. Silksong makes up for that in other areas. While I did prefer the heavier focus on risk-reward healing of the first game, I can see why they made the changes they did here. Then we have the charm system overhaul. No longer are we dealing with charms, but crests and tools. This system, I wasn't sure what to make of it early on. They could have stuck with the charm system with a few tweaks for how well implemented it was. But they took things in a very different direction. The further I got in and the more I experimented with the crest system, it did win me over. It's one of the better successes of Silksong. Not a fan of Hornet's default movement, that 45-degree angle pogo throwing you off? You have options in changing your moveset. Over the course of your travels, you can find different crests. If you want to play more like how the Knight handled, you could use the Wanderer crest. It's the other crests where things get far more interesting. Like the Beast crest. You have a shorter range but attack faster. Instead of healing while binding, you enter what I like to call Beast mode and strike even faster. Landing hits will heal your health for a time. So if you time this right, you could heal several masks in a heartbeat. This was my go-to crest whenever I was hitting my head against the wall while fighting a boss or a combat gauntlet. Although sometimes I would get sloppy while entering Beast mode and try to get more hits in, resulting in a net loss or death. I love Hornet's war cries as you attack in this mode. And if you found the Hunter downstrike, the default crest, tricky, good luck here with the arcing downstrike. I know some mad lads out there are going to push themselves by using this crest for some of the game's more trickier platforming sections. The Reaper crest was my go-to for most of the game. Its downstrike behaved in a similar manner to the Knight's, but it was the bind benefit that made it a mainstay for my playthrough. Not only do you heal, you have a short time frame where each hit provides a silk pickup. Equipped with tools to enhance silk and further upgrades, this crest worked great for defense to ensure a heal was almost always available. There's always a trade-off when it comes to these crests, not only for their movement, but in their loadouts. That's where tools come into the fray. Tools are somewhat like the charm system with some tweaks. There's no notch system. All tools cost the same, but tools fall under different categories. White for silk skills, red for sub-weapons, blue for defense, yellow for exploration. You can unlock further tool slots with memory lockets, and depending on which crest you pick, you have different loadout possibilities. And these are where the trade-offs come into consideration. Some crests will have more blue slots, or yellow slots, or red slots. If you're into using the red tools or the sub-weapons, you have more options with the architect crest, the trade-off of no access to silk skills. If you're thorough in your exploration, you'll come across upgrade tool slots independent of your crest. There's plenty of tools to find in our travels, whether discovering or purchasing. This gives plenty of player freedom in how they want to tackle challenges. There is always the trade-off to consider. The red tool slots are where things get the most interesting. These are for the sub-weapons, think the Castlevania series. There's a whole variety of ones to choose from. Some you could use more often before you need to return to a bench to replenish with beast shards. You can upgrade your capacity and damage over the course of the game through side quests and purchases. With how much I used them, they became the priority upgrade when I had the rosaries for them. Although I should have finished that one side quest in Shellwood much sooner for the tool upgrade that adds poison damage. I found myself using the string shard and tax as my go-to combo for sub-weapons. String shards to catch air enemies or leaping attacks, tax to catch ground enemies. It was always fun to stumble across a new sub-weapon to try it out and see how it would work. You can push tools to a whole new level with the Architect Crest, which gives you the ability to craft tools right there in the moment. There's also one tool that allows you to double your tools, and you could do ridiculous amounts of damage within a short frame of time. Of course, there's always a trade-off. While sub-weapons are great in a pinch, you do have to consider their limited usage and your shard count. As well, attacks do not replenish your silk. You need your needle attacks to do that. But in encounters where you're dealing with multiple enemies, which Silksong loves to make use of, they can be a godsend to keep things manageable. You add all these elements together and you get a great system full of depth and decision making. One that has similarities to the one in Hollow Knight, but takes a very different approach. As mentioned, I wasn't sure what to make of it at first with how great the charm system was, but for what Silksong is going for, it's a great change and they nailed the execution. It gives you plenty of flexibility in your approaches to combat, and when Silksong gets its combat encounters right, there's little out there like it. One that I found with its highs bested Hollow Knight. Some of the boss fights are the best I've played in some time. When it comes to the best of what Silksong offered on its boss roster, I'd be a bit bummed out when I won. I was having so much fun learning the patterns, locking in, and getting better each attempt. Each death was a learning lesson for the next time around. Bosses like Trubio are a blast to learn while getting a strong sense of who their character is. Trubio is very much a larger-than-life character with his theatrical nature in all his attacks and movement. There are a few bosses that have me reducing or outright stopping usage of sub-weapons. The duels with Phantom, with Seth, and Lace were great dances where I stuck with the needle. It didn't feel right to use sub-weapons. Finding those tiny windows to get an attack in before dashing away was an absolute blast. Bosses like Nihileth test your ability to juggle platforming with combat. I'd love to try this boss again, but use the Beast Crest to test my downstriking ability. You have bosses like the Great Conch Flies that play like the Mantis Lords in dealing with multiple foes. But the highlight of this approach is with the Cogwork Dancers. Very much a dance with their attack pattern, rhythm, and the music, speeding up each phase. I'm sure we were all thinking, uh-oh, when we reached that fourth phase, that the lone Cogwork Dancer was going to go all out. But no, they've lost all spring to their step. They're a shell of their former self without the other around, especially when they went for that one middle embrace. Having a boss's last phase be the weakest is something to use in a sparse manner, but can add so much to its impact. Bringing up Dark Souls, Sif's movement close to death is a perfect example of this. Team Cherry made great use of it here. A minor quibble, but I did find a few encounters where readability could be a bit of an issue, like the Widow fight or Khan, where there could be so much going on that you could lose track of what's coming your way. Now some of this can be a result of throwing around sub-weapons like No Tomorrow, and that's another one of the drawbacks to consider of heavy usage with them. There was only a handful of these moments throughout Silksong, but ones I want to make note of. I don't recall this happening in Hollow Knight, even during the most intense of encounters. There were also encounters where Chakra would join the fight, where it would be a bit tough to tell if what's coming your way is an enemy projectile or one from Chakra. While Hornet's larger hitbox does take some time to get used to, I only found one fight to have what felt like questionable hitboxes in their attacks. That being the Volt Firm, where the blast radius seemed to last longer than it should have. So, where does Silksong become questionable within its combat? Ask almost everyone and you're going to get the diatribe of the double damage dilemma, the criticism that rises above all others when discussing its difficulty. When you got hit for 2 masks in Hollow Knight, it was a huge deal. You needed to watch out for those attacks and avoid damage at all costs. It had sparse usage, so when you felt it, you really felt it. But Silksong? It's like every other enemy is hitting you with an attack for 2 mask damage. Even basic enemies can have a couple of these attacks. It's the damage system where I'm most curious to see how Team Cherry adjusts with future patches. That said, I'm not sure the solution is a simple reduce damage across all fronts. The healing system of healing for 3 masks? It's built around this idea of enemies throwing around greater levels of damage. Now, I have no issues with outright removing the 2 mask contact damage. If you bump into an enemy while striking them and they're doing nothing, there's no reason to take 2 damage. Where the issue also rises with double damage is your starting number of masks, that being 5. It takes some time to find these shards necessary to upgrade to 6 masks. But if so many hits cause double damage, having 6 doesn't make a difference. That's still 3 hits until death. With how stingy the upgrades were, once I hit the 7 mask number, I didn't go out of my way to find mask shards. If I did, great. But to find 8 more shards to get an additional possible hit due to the overabundance of double damage was a frustrating affair. Now, there are tools to mitigate these damage issues beyond getting better at the game, like using the Fractured Mask tool, which I missed for a good chunk of a game due to being tucked away. It could give you 1 additional hit before death, before needing a repair at a bench. But that additional hit can be a godsend, the difference between winning a boss and a death. Or if you're dealing with an enemy that deals fire damage, you can use the Magma Bell for damage reduction. Looking back at my footage, I could have saved myself a bunch of trouble had I equipped it during the Cygnus or the Last Judge fight. But this is only for certain stretches of the game where this will come in handy. There's also the Plasmium File sub-weapon that you could gain access to for temporary masks. Very handy to use in bosses or gauntlets once you have the patterns down. That said, you have to refill the vial after a limited number of usages. And it's not like you just go back to the bench. You'll need to head back to Wormways to the Alchemist to refill it, which is a bit of the way to do so. It feels like for several of these double damage attacks, whether bosses or enemies, were only done for the sake of it. Not a whole lot of rhyme or reason. Instead of making more complex attack patterns to decipher, it was easier to bump it up. Fights like Phantom, a fantastic duel, have most of her attacks do only 1 mask of damage. I didn't feel as a result of this that it was a lesser boss. It was a great dance to partake in as I whittled down her health while keeping mine up. That said, I have no issue with the 3 mask damage attack you could receive if you weren't careful from the Grandmother Silk fight. If you screwed up the dodge, that was on you. Its late game placement felt justified in throwing one of these your way. If you got hit, you're going to feel it. But the over-reliance of double damage isn't the only issue with Silksong's combat, far from it. There are other tricks that Silksong goes to the well too often with its boosting and difficulty, like a boss summoning mobs throughout the fight. No boss does a better job of combining all the worst elements of Silksong than the infamous Savage Beastfly. The double damage contact, a bizarre movement pattern where it could be unclear if you should jump or stay on the ground, a health pool that's a good 15 to 20% larger than it needs to be. But it's once it summons its minions that things become downright frustrating. As a result, this fight enters into the realm of artificial difficulty, where the game takes some shortcuts to boosted difficulty in a frustrating way. I've seen Dark Souls 2 come up in conversation about Silksong's difficulty, and I see that as an apt comparison at times, especially on the front of making boss encounters more difficult or frustrating by throwing in mobs into the fold. And this one with the Savage Beastfly, these enemies can take a while to go down. That said, there are some bosses where the game does a decent job of integrating mobs into the fight. The Raging Conchfly rematch is a great example. It will summon mobs that handle like projectiles. You can dodge them and move on, or you could hit them, giving you a chance to replenish some silk, but they disappear until summoned once again. The Broodmother fight, while not as good as the Raging Conchfly, does a reasonable job of integrating mobs. They go down in 1 hit, at least with my upgrades at the time they did, but you have to be aware of the explosion after their death. The fight against Cygnus made use of mobs before Cygnus summoned another boss character, and I didn't have many issues with this one. Although looking back at my footage for this fight, I could have saved myself some trouble had I equipped the Magma Bell. It was easy enough to push a mob enemy into a lava wall. But with the Savage Beastfly, when everything here compared to Hollow Knight has far greater health pools, if you're trying to defeat it early in the game before upgrades, you're looking at several strikes to take down one of the mob enemies. And then you have to deal with the Beastfly itself. Never seemed like it would die. Now this will vary depending on your needle upgrades throughout, but chopping down boss health by a good 10 to 15% across the board, I'd have no issues with. As much as I enjoyed many a boss fight within Silksong, I was ready to move on. There's no new patterns here, now it's only a war of attrition and I hope I don't screw up. But the most egregious well Silksong returns to over and over again is the Combat Gauntlet. Locked in a room, make your way through waves of enemies in various combinations until you win. It felt like a in case of emergency break glass situation. Been a while since the last boss? Let's throw in a Combat Gauntlet. My heart would sink when I entered a new one, especially that High Halls Gauntlet. Some could keep going and going with no end in sight. Before you face the boss Khan, you have to go through a few separate combat gauntlets, and I hope you discover the shortcut back in case you die against him, else you have to go through all of them again. But at least here they were separate from him as a boss fight. Because another one of Silksong's frustrations for bumping up difficulty is throwing a boss at the end of a gauntlet. Carmelita may be my favorite boss in the game. Her movements, the frantic pace yet readable combos, the music, it all comes together in such a beautiful way. Some of the most fun I had in Silksong was from this fight. At least her portion of the fight. For whatever reason, there's a gauntlet to go through beforehand, one that's such a breeze to get through. So what was the point? But nothing. Absolutely nothing compares to the gauntlet in Biowater. All the worst of Silksong, beyond the area's music track, which is one of the best. These enemies in the gauntlet can be hard to get a read on, especially if you're going for a downward strike. Fall into the water, now you have to have enough silk to clear it off before you can use silk for healing or skills again. But it gets worse. Then you have a boss waiting for you at the end of the gauntlet. Nothing too difficult, but you've gone through a whole gauntlet beforehand. But to twist the knife, in come summon mobs. When this first happened, I quit right away and put my controller down in disgust. I tend to not get angry when playing games, but I did here. I left Biowater at that point to explore the Citadel further. That's some of my most enjoyable moments within Silksong. Such a contrast with what lay within Biowater. Funny enough, when I returned to Biowater later on, I beat this gauntlet and boss in one go. But what makes this Biowater encounter so infuriating is the runback itself, something that comes up in Silksong in various spots. Runbacks can be a contentious sticking point. What's the point of them? Why can't every boss have a bench right outside of it? Well, having a bit of time to digest before you try again can be beneficial. Instead of running back in right away, you have to navigate back. It gives you a bit of time to reflect, to cool down, a bit of separation before trying again. And it also raises the stakes. Die again and you'll find yourself making another trek back. It's a very delicate balancing act. It's far too easy to create a frustrating runback that's too long. The one for the Last Judge that I've seen a lot of complaints about? Didn't mind it. This is one of my favorite fights in the game. A great assortment of attacks with readable patterns, and once again looking back at my footage, I really should have made use of the Magma Bell to give myself more breathing room by reducing the fire attacks. But requiring a few attempts, I did have to make the trek back a handful of times. A trek which isn't too long, and once you get the feel for it, you can make through it without a scratch. It gives you a bit of that downtime before hopping back into the thick of things. So for that last encounter, when I won, I was locked in. Even if I didn't mind the runback, I still had it in the back of my mind. The stakes are high. I took my time, I didn't rush, didn't try to push my luck with getting additional attacks in, kept my health high. If I got hit, that was all on me. So when the Last Judge finally went down, which again they could do with chopping down enemy health across the board, the victory I felt eclipsed most of other bosses in some time, Silksong or otherwise. It felt like the perfect end to Act 1 before diving into Act 2. Another notable runback is the Moorwing runback in Greymoor, which is a fight you could skip altogether if you make enough progress in the Flea side quest. While a bit on the long side, I didn't have too many issues with this runback. You know what enemies to expect along the way and how to dodge them. Morrowind is one of the more egregious examples of a boss with an overinflated health pool. Although for the first patch, this is being reduced, and you could also mitigate it with Garmin joining in on the fight. I found the runback to Seth could be quite annoying with its platforming stretch, even if it wasn't too long. But one type of runback quote-unquote, which I'm saying here in air quotes, that annoyed me were the dream runbacks. If you died against bosses like Khan or Carmelita or Nihilith, you had to re-enter the dream by playing your needle in. Why they didn't throw you back to the start of the dream, I don't know. It's not like platforming back where you actually have to do things. Here it's just playing that and quite frustrating. But Biowater trumps them all. That runback, awful. And I feel extra bad for those who didn't find that one bench tucked away. The actual bench that doesn't break. That one bench that breaks is such a dick move that felt too far. Yes, there were other benches that could throw you off, like the trap bench in Hunter's March or the stuck bench in Sinner's Road, but you could fix those and make use of them. Even with the hidden bench, it's still a long run back to the gauntlet and boss fights of Biowater. What makes this runback extra frustrating is its inconsistency. At least for the other runbacks, you know what enemies to expect. They were always the same. For the Biowater runback, it could be a real crapshoot if that one enemy type would pop out of the water and throw you off. Moving away from bosses, gauntlets, and runbacks, Silksong can also overplay its hand with flying enemies. This is a lesser issue than the prior ones, but still one to note. Silksong loves to use flying enemies that fly a bit of reach before attacking. Now, you can mitigate this as the game goes on. As you gain more sub-weapons, you have more options to hit them beyond your needle. Or with an expanded moveset like the double jump or claw line, you can reach them. Feels like it's one of those tricks the game goes to the well too often with. If I had a rosary for every time an enemy would fly out of range, I'd be able to buy myself some nice gear and benches without a worry. But before we talk about the currency system, let's keep things in the air and talk about platforming. Silksong gives you far more options when it comes to air movement, like the clawline skill as mentioned earlier, along with the Drifter's Cloak. The game makes great use of these, combined with double jumps and wall jumps for the later game platforming stretches. Of course, some things take some time to get used to, like the diagonal down strike for the Hunter's Crest. I'm sure we all took a few tries to get through those early platforming stretches in Hunter's March. It did take some time to get used to, but after a bit I felt comfortable with it. Of course, once I unlocked further crests, it was rare for me to return to the Hunter's Crest. The Reaper Crest, being the crest of choice for me, had a downstroke more akin to the Wanderer's Crest, or the down slash from Hollow Knight. That said, it still had enough of a difference to take into consideration, most notable when trying to stack down slashes on enemies. With the Reaper Crest, I could find myself at times mistiming a follow-up down slash if enemy placement changed, or if I couldn't get the timing right, or a combination of the two. Of course, there's the downward strike with the Beast Crest, that's a whole different ballgame. Hornet has quite the arc with it to take into consideration. As mentioned earlier, some mad lads are going to use this crest to push themselves to the game's most difficult platforming sections. If used enough, I'm sure I would get the spacing and timing right. It played a factor in why I'd bypass the crest if a boss had a long run back like Biowater. When I gained the double jump, there was a bit of a relearning period. With how much time passed, I'd gotten so used to the drift. Instead of having the float come out right away, there was the double jump first. There are periods during this adjustment where I'd take damage as a result with falling into spikes or roofs. Expecting the float, but it's a double jump. But I did adjust to it, and if you hit down and jump, you could skip the double jump and go right for the float. But for whatever reason, they're removing that in the first patch. I did have a few times where I thought I hit down and jump, but a double jump came out instead. I have to think this was one of the reasons for the patch, although I do hope to see it return. And beyond a few exceptions, as tough as these platforming sections could be, I found them to be a fair challenge. I did also enjoy the game throwing you for a loop in some stretches, like how Mount Fae forced you to deal with the cold with stops of warmth for a quick breather. Now that I think about it, would the Magma Bell actually help you there? Probably would. Or how the Sands of Carrick had the platform unfold from thorns before disappearing just as quick. And while the Putrefied Ducks was, well, putrid as an area, I like the addition of Half-Life Barnacles for its platforming sections. The ascent from the abyss with lava in pursuit, that got the heart rate going as much as any other moment in the game. There was next to no room for error, but what a rush to get through it. Silksong builds upon the original's platforming to deliver some of the most intense, challenging, and enjoyable platforming I've encountered in some time. Of course, there are a couple further annoyances that feel like artificial difficulty. The double damage by falling into a pit or spike can rear its ugly head here. Not all the time, but like contact damage has no business being here. The other annoyance arises from throwing in enemies into the mix. If anything, I found this far more egregious than the double damage falls. Bywater being a great example. Platform requires most of your focus as is, so throwing in these large buggers and these little ones throughout didn't lead to a more enjoyable experience. Still, beyond a few moments, I found more satisfaction with Silksong's platforming over Hollow Knight's, which was already a strong system. Another one of Silksong's twists to the gameplay is its revamped currency system. It was a roller coaster in how I felt about the changes to the currency system of Silksong. Early on, I found myself digging with what they were going for here. Then there would be stretches where it added an overabundance of frustrations, especially the mid-game before settling down again. There were stretches where I found it enhanced the experience to add more stakes, yet it crosses the line of frustration more often than not and moving away from tension. While I love the idea of the greater focus on resource management, its execution can be spotty throughout. In Hollow Knight, you were swimming in Geo, the game's currency. From enemies, bosses, finding it in the environment. It was rare to come across merchants or moments where I didn't have enough Geo on hand. If I died before recovering my soul, also losing my Geo, most times it was kind of a bit of a shoulder shrug. For Silksong, they went in the opposite direction. Instead, our currency is rosaries and Farloom. This world is far more stingy for doling them out. Not all enemies will drop rosaries. Those on their pilgrimage will drop them upon defeat. But a decent chunk of enemies don't. They'll only drop shards, which we use to refill our sub-weapons. You'll find rosaries tucked away in your travels. What about bosses? When you beat them in Hollow Knight, they explode into a pile of Geo. Here, more often than not, nothing. Only the path forward as a reward or the occasional item drop. But nothing as far as rosaries go. So when you find rosaries, especially early on, it's a big deal. You have to be far more selective with what you purchase. Should I buy this tool, save up for a simple key? Or what about those rosary strings? I had some painful lessons within Silksong when it came to the rosary strings. Death works in a similar fashion to Hollow Knight. Upon death, you'll lose your rosaries, unless you return to your point of death to break your silk cocoon. There's an additional hurdle compared to Hollow Knight here. If you died against the boss in Hollow Knight, your shade would float outside the boss arena. In Silksong, your cocoon will be within the boss arena. So if you were hoping to recover your rosaries and try a different direction, you may not have the option depending on its placement in the boss arena. But there are ways to mitigate this loss of rosaries. At certain merchants and stops along the way, you can convert rosaries into rosary strings, or you can find them throughout your travels. When you die, these rosaries remain in your inventory. Of course, there's always a cost trade-off. If you want to make a rosary string of 60 rosaries, you'll need to shell over 80 rosaries. Although once you progress forward, you can find a merchant in Bellheart to make a string of 120 rosaries for 140 rosaries, a better deal. On that note, I don't know why they had the merchant and Songclave within the Citadel only offer the 60 for 80 deal. Yes, it's easy to return to Bellheart with the elevators within Citadel and the Bell Beast. With how much time you could spend in the Citadel, why not give us the 120 for 140 option? I know by this point we're swimming in rosaries with most enemies here, but still. There is another option that opens up later on for recovering your rosaries without having to pick up your cocoon, that being the Silk Eater. They are rare to come across, but can save you a frustrating ordeal. Don't want to make your way back to recover your rosaries? Is it a long way off? These can help you in a pinch by returning all those rosaries without having to make the trek back to your cocoon. Early on, I didn't think much of creating rosary strings. If I find some along the way, great, but I didn't give much thought to making them. If I died, I'd go and recover my rosaries, or attempt to. There was a moment earlier on the Wormways where I ran to Chakra, only to realize I didn't have enough rosaries on hand. I walked away before realizing, wait a minute, I have some rosary strings on hand. So I broke them to give myself enough rosaries to purchase a map. I forgot for a moment that I had them. I gave so little thought to them at that moment. But I did learn my lessons in short order. I'm sure like many others did the value creating rosary strings when you could. The higher-ups of Farloom within the Citadel love to nickel and dime you whenever they can. Benches you find along the way, many require rosaries to access. Now, not all. It was always such a nice relief to find a new bench that was free, but many will charge. The same goes for Bell Beast warp points. Want to access it? Cough up some rosaries to open up a shortcut. If you're playing sloppy, if you're not doing a good job of recovering your rosaries or creating rosary strings, you may find yourself in an unfavorable situation. Like I had making my way through Sinner's Road and into Biowater. Biowater. Probably feels like 90% of my frustrations came from this area. Areas where Silksong loves to amp up on its frustrations. So I made it through to a bench in the beast after a long journey, only to have my heart sink. I didn't have enough rosaries on hand to open either. Rosary strings? Didn't have any on me. In these areas, there were next to no enemies coughing up rosaries. A painful lesson, to say the least. I did also have this happen at times with Chakra. Instead of moments of relief upon hearing her singing, I could have moments of my heart dropping when I realized I didn't have enough rosaries, strings or otherwise, on hand to buy a map. This is where I could feel the roller coaster of my thoughts and feelings when it came to the currency system of Silksong. Felt like a case of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Hollow Knight, the currency system was not much of a challenge. You were flown geos with the greatest of ease. For Silksong, they want to make it more of a challenge. It very much feels like a case of going overboard for good stretches of the game. Early stretches, not much of an issue. Once you get to the Citadel, same boat. But there are certain mid-game stretches or areas where it rears its ugly head in its stinginess. I love the idea behind the currency system. One of the reasons I'm such a big fan of survival horror systems is resource management. I love risk-reward systems when done right. The currency system as is so close to getting it right. But when it falls out of balance, it takes away from the experience. I am curious to see how they change the balancing of it. For the first patch, they are reducing the mid-game benches and Bell Beast summon costs. Once you get a feel for Farloom and unlock shortcuts, you can find spots for farming rosaries, especially in the Citadel. There's a tool, the Thief's Mark, which causes enemies to drop more rosaries. But there is a trade-off, as you'll lose rosaries that you cannot reclaim upon taking damage. I also have to make note of some of the frustrations with purchasing items from stores. Some descriptions can be quite vague. We're not 100% certain of what you're going to get. There was one tool from the 12th Architect that behaved far different than expected from its description. Now I can understand the narrative reason for this, the merchant may not have a full understanding themselves. With how pricey and stingy the world of Farloom is, it did lead to a few cases of unnecessary frustration. But one of the greatest frustrations of all with rosaries? Spikes. Once they drop into spikes, they're gone for good. Yes, you can mitigate rosaries flying all over the place with a tool to pull them in. It felt like over the course of the game, the amount of rosaries I lost to spikes could have allowed me to buy all items across all stores. Especially the Citadel with narrow platforms surrounded by spikes and flying enemies, where I try to position myself to kill enemies to minimize losing them to spikes. Why couldn't there be an option where you had to downstrike the spikes to return the rosaries? With how stingy at times rosaries could be, I wouldn't mind seeing some changes made here. The currency system of Silksong is a frustrating one that comes close to greatness. At times it can enhance the experience. When I made it to the Citadel, only for the rug pulled underneath me and ended up in the underworks, I had no rosary strings on hand. This area has some benches that are only temporary access. You get one-time use for each time you spend rosaries. But it's a low price, and there's enough enemies around to replenish in short order. You feel like miles away as you're nowhere near close to a Bell Beast. You have to make your way back up from the underbelly of the underworks. It was such a great moment to emerge into the coral chambers and see what the rest of the Citadel had in store. I love moments like this, and it gave tension and stakes to rosaries, but not overboard. Beyond seeing what they do with double damage moving forward, I'm most curious how they tweak the currency system of Silksong. I'm not saying they need to go overboard and revert back to Hollow Knight and its generosity with Geo, but it could use some tweaking, especially the mid-game. Oh, and I wouldn't mind seeing bosses drop rosaries. Doesn't need to be a ton, but it would be a nice reward upon victory, just like it was in the first game. Relating to the rosary system is the shell shard system, one more straightforward and one I came to appreciate over the course of the game. All enemies will drop shards, along with finding them throughout our travels. You don't lose them upon death, unlike rosaries. While at times you could use them during side quests or wishes, their main usage is for replenishing your sub-weapons. When you return to a bench, you'll replenish your count if you have enough shards. The more often you make use of sub-weapons, the more you'll need shell shards. This did lead to a couple of results. One was to incentivize fighting enemies instead of running by them, especially if they dropped rosaries. If you're heavy into using sub-weapons like I was, you want to keep your shell shards topped off. The other result would arise in combat encounters where I'd hit my head against the wall, like a boss fight or gauntlet I couldn't seem to overcome. I kept dying but using tools throughout, the shell shard count would start to whittle down, to the point where I may run out and not have enough to replenish my tools. This was a good sign for me to come back later. Try going a different direction, explore new locations, find new tools, take some time away and come back at a later time. Like clockwork, whenever I would do this, I come back later and would tend to get through these previous hurdles in a couple of tries. Because there's never a shortage of areas to explore in Silksong, it's incredible how much they tucked away for you to find in Farloom. It reminds me of Elden Ring in its scope and how much the game would hide away from you on the surface. When you thought you'd seen it all or most of it, there was even more than you thought possible. One nice surprise was ending up in the slab. A failed fight with an enemy wielding a cage in biowater can bring you here. At first, you can't even see where the slab is on the map. It made me think of the Metroid Zero Mission stretch in the Zero Suit. It was a relief the execution here is well done compared to Zero Mission. It's only a short little stretch before Hornet gets her gear back. But it was a great way for the game to throw you for a loop and out of your element. Hornet showing no mercy with the neck snap did give me a chuckle. There's also a unique gauntlet encounter within the slab without your gear. Sure, you could use your fists to take these enemies down, but it does take a while, even more so than the needle. Or you can make use of these traps that you can set off. It was a nice change of pace to what you could do in combat. And it's something I wish the game offered more with. There were other stretches here and there of offering traps, but there was still plenty of mileage to be had with it. It's what made the Whispering Vault such a great area. That and the fact I went there after hitting my head against the wall in Biowater, such a contrast in quality. You can make use of these movable platforms for a couple of reasons. One, to open up areas for platforming. If any enemies were along the designated path of these platforms, it would take them down in one blow. I also love the platform puzzles in this area of moving them around to clear the way forward. Something akin to a tile puzzle. They could have gotten far more mileage out of them, and it's something I hope to see more of in a future DLC. Adding to the sheer amount of content within Silksong are the side quests, or wishes as they're known. Some are your standard side quest fodder. Collect X amount of items from defeating enemies. Some are more interesting and worthwhile, like tracking down merchants with a scent, or the ones related to characters you get to know over the course of the game, like Shurma or Chakra. The rewards can be all over the place. Some of you know beforehand what to expect for a reward, others you won't. There's no doubt in my mind Team Cherry had the giggles making a wish with a rematch with the Savage Beastfly. The more I played, the more it became clear why the game took so long to come out. The scope of Silksong absolutely dwarfs Hollow Knight. The game isn't afraid to make you work for it to find it all. And this is where a comparison to Elden Ring comes up once again for Silksong. Focusing on the base game of Elden Ring, I loved it. As great as it was, there were many notable flaws. I'm not talking the combat here, but one was the sheer size of the game itself. Up until the Royal Capital section, an incredible experience, but then it kept going, and going, and going. If the mountaintops of the giants remained on the cutting room floor, I wouldn't have missed it. If they cut down on a sizable chunk of optional areas, repeat bosses, we would have had a tighter experience. Elden Ring to me felt like a game that if they chopped down a good 10 to 20% of what they had, it would have been a far better experience. Or they could have focused more on polishing a smaller amount of content. Well, not to the same extent. It's something I felt that Silksong could have made use of. If Biowater or the Putrefied Ducks never made into the game, Silksong would be no loss for wear. Sinner's Road I could give or take on keeping. I didn't mind the twist to the mist for finding your way through, but those wraiths were cruel and brutal to deal with. The way they could move through walls and take away your silk along with your health, those were a pain to deal with. The Wormways felt like they wanted to do more with, but didn't. Like they wanted to have another equivalent of the Deep Nest from Hollow Knight but smaller, but didn't go all the way. To me, the Wormways felt like it was just kind of there. Not a bad area by any stretch, but nothing stood out with it. Something else that could have remained on the cutting room floor. I didn't feel that way much about anywhere else. They could stay. Hunter's March was a nice eye-opener of what to expect as far as difficulty goes in the early game. It was clear they spent most of their time on the Citadel stretch. Beyond a few questionable spots, it was sheer bliss making my way through. From its roster of bosses, platforming, exploration, it was metroidvania bliss. Opening up shortcuts on the regular, to the elevator shortcuts, and to the Bell Beast if you want to hop around Farloom. Mwah! Chef's kiss. Well, not chef's kiss from disgraced Chef Ligoli. Even if you complete the game staying in Act 2, there's more than enough for a great deal of satisfaction. But my goodness, does Silksong make you work to unlock Act 3? At the moment, it's a bit vague of what the exact requirements are for unlocking Act 3. Do all the wishes on the boards? Move the flea caravan to its final stop in the northeast? There might be another couple of other steps, but it's staggering how much Silksong tucks away unless you're willing to explore with a fine-tooth comb. When you consider how low completion rates tend to be for games, it's incredible how much Silksong offers the player to find below the surface. Once again, the further I dug into Silksong, the more it became clear why it took so long to make. Team Cherry found themselves in the position in a cutthroat industry that other studios would die for. Hollow Knight was a humble indie Kickstarter success story that became a phenomenon. An evergreen title with a long tail as a constant seller, where it's now sold over a staggering 15 million copies since release. Team Cherry could have grown its team size, they had more than enough money to do so, which they did to an extent but kept it very minimal. They could have buckled under pressure with such a large devoted fanbase, but they kept their distance from online communities. They hunkered down to work on Silksong, hearing about the occasional memes from their families. Which in the day and age when developers can't shut up on Twitter and can't seem to get off Discord, such a nice change of pace. They made the game they wanted to make. Now, could they have done a better job of communicating their delays? Oh yeah, especially that one in 2023. They should have taken the old Blizzard approach of it's done when it's done, back when that meant something at Blizzard. It's not like they had to do much to keep fans anticipating the game. The fans did a lion's share of that for the marketing. That interview they did for Bloomberg was quite the enlightening read. Development hell? Well, not really. They had so much fun making the game. They kept their team small, hence the long wait. They want to, with their funds and their lack of deadlines, they could have gone as long as they wanted making the game. In the interview, Ari Gibson mentioned he had to stop sketching, else it would have taken 15 more years. I am curious to why they decided now was the time. They are going to add in more content in the future like they did with Hollow Knight, but why now as opposed to 2023? Or what if they decide to keep going? There was a funny line from the Bloomberg interview saying, feels like we're going to ruin their fun by releasing the game. One other element I want to talk about here is the narrative and the story of Silksong and how it unfolds, less about the plot itself. While Silksong does have ties back to the original through Hornet and especially in Act 3, it's very much its own thing. Faith is very much the pillar of the world of Farloom, its presence felt in all areas. Something that came up here and there in Hollow Knight, but here it's the main focus. Instead of a descent into Hollow Nest, it's an ascent up to the Citadel. It can be quite the ascent if you're thorough in your exploration. Even then, if you come from the west, you have the rug pulled out by having to make your way through the underworks back up. And it's there where you can witness the underbelly of this world of Farloom, of what the Citadel does to remain propped up. They hide away from the pilgrims on their journey, which we'll find more of once we make our way through the Citadel. From a narrative standpoint, the constant nickel and diming of benches and bell beasts does make sense for what the rosaries trickle up to. There is a funny moment where Sherma thinking it's singing that will open up a bench, unaware that it's rosaries that do the trick, which isn't the only instance. We opened up the door at the game's beginning when he thought it was him singing that did so.
Sacra de la Dala. Sa Deloria.
Gave me great curiosity how Sherma makes his way through this world without a scratch. It's not like he's Chakra, who's skilled warrior. Sherma only has unwavering optimism, devotion, innocence, and the sound of clanging driving him forward. Had that catchy song of his, and it's little wonder he captured the hearts of players everywhere. Of course, I'm sure we all had Mila in the back of our mind with Sherma, so when I came across that wish saying Sherma went down to Whiteward and hasn't returned, I made a beeline over. Nothing else mattered at that moment. All Sherma wanted to do was find healing supplies to help his fellow pilgrims above. It was such a relief that he was safe, but was such a heartbreaking moment if you get him to sing here. He lacks the same enthusiasm in his singing, wondering why there's so much suffering if he's not holy enough. The event does a number on his devotion and faith, but Sherma pushes through to help others. After Hornet collapses at the beginning of Act 3, it was no surprise to wake up with Sherma standing over her, clanging away. The wardrobe upgrade. He's now in charge of keeping the people safe here. Even with his crisis of faith, what he went through and what happened to the land of Farloom after the end of Act 2, his courage and determination never fails in helping others. It's classic storytelling 101 with Sherma, one that works so well ever since we were grunting at each other painting figures on walls and caves. I did miss the scene, but you could find him splashing away in a pool within the Citadel. Team Cherry does have upcoming merch for Silksong. I'm sure they could self-fund the making of their next project with sales of Sherma plushies alone. You could also say the same about plushies for the Bell Beast. Unlike the last stag from the original, she does not speak. It's not like it matters to make her any less memorable or likable. Not long after Act 3 begins, summoning her will bring about the Bell Eater for a boss fight. This fight was far more personal than other bosses. It was very much a oh no you didn't kind of fight. Following the fight, it was very much a hell yeah kind of moment where she comes flying in to finish off the Bell Eater, along with many Bell Beasts emerging.
later.
Now we have access to return to a Bell Beast location at any time. Despite not having long distances between Bell Beast locations, it was a nice addition to have in the game's end stretch. If Team Cherry does continue with the series past Silksong, it wouldn't surprise me if Chakra or Lace becomes the future protagonist. Although Chakra, you would be dealing with a far larger hitbox. It would feel like a bigger jump compared to one going from Knight to Hornet. I had a curiosity going into Silksong how Hornet would be as a protagonist. She's not a silent protagonist like the Knight. We got a bit of an idea of who she was in the first game in her words and actions, but she makes the leap well to this starring role. Team Cherry did well making the leap from a silent protagonist to a voiced one. She's kind and curious to all those in Farloom, and never wavers in the face of adversity to those who challenge her. Be sure to read through the Hunter's Journal. Not only does it flesh out the world of Farloom, but Hornet as well. You can gain more insight to who she is and her past as a result. Beyond talking with others, there's far more that lies beyond the surface. One that we could bring about with the Needlein, this game's equivalent of the Dream Nail. Instead of getting their silent thoughts, we'll hear their thoughts as they sing along to Hornet playing. There's a lot of fun to hear how they'd sing along to the Needlein, along with their thoughts. Even better if you find the tool that expands its reach to have several characters sing at once. This also makes it far easier to hear the thoughts of enemies. I had a fun stretch during Act 3 revisiting past areas to hear the thoughts of the enemies. Ways to learn more about this realized world Team Cherry has put together. The lore explorers are going to have a field day with Silksong. With the notes I took, I have what feels like a reasonable understanding of the workings of Farloom. I do look forward to seeing what others can piece together and expand on. While I found Hollow Knight had the overall better cast of characters, I found the best characters of Silksong, like Shirma, to be far more memorable. Which feels like the best way of comparing the two games at this moment in time. When Silksong is at its best, it surpasses Hollow Knight. It's not as consistent. Some are a result of making adjustments to the formula. Others are a result of the game in its early state. If you're like me, you didn't get to Hollow Knight until some time after its initial release, where they ironed out the kinks and added further content, some being the best the game had to offer. So I will follow with great interest what Team Cherry will add to Silksong. But I am as curious for how they'll adjust the game with patches as time goes on. For this first patch, they're keeping the main focus on bugs with a few gameplay adjustments, not a major overhaul. With how they kept their head down in development, I'm curious to how much they're looking at game data along with what players are talking about. I don't foresee an issue where they overcorrect with panic patches and nerfs, something I've heard various games go through over the past several years through osmosis. While I didn't play Helldivers, I was aware of its wavering reception due to constant nerfs and patches. It seemed like the developers overcorrected. Now to be fair, Silksong is a single-player title. It's a far different approach when it comes to rebalancing and tweaking with future patches beyond bug fixes. Though with Team Cherry's track record, I'm sure they'll find something that's the right balance. Bringing up FromSoft titles again, it's always a fascinating period when new titles come out. How they raise the bar once again with the difficulty. That they've gone too far this time with pushing the difficulty into unfair territory. But over time, players get used to the changes, play around more, and overcome challenges that once seemed impossible. Although it feels like they've more or less pushed that to a limit with Shadow of the Erdtree. At least it feels that way. Who knows what will happen with the Duskbloods. In a way, Team Cherry's trajectory follows the Souls line of titles, going from a cult hit through word of mouth to an industry-wide phenomenon, where game difficulty becomes such a vocal point of the game themselves. How each game changes the formula, and that time frame players required to drop old habits from prior titles. As of writing, it's only been a little over a week since Silksong came out. Yes, some of the difficulty complaints are valid. Double damage from contact and pits can see themselves to the door. The rosary system can use some tweaking, but I'm curious to how much Team Cherry adjusts versus getting the player to adjust. After a few painful moments early on and lessons, I dropped most of those old Hollow Knight habits. Silksong wants you to play in a very different way. How much they expect the player to change their ways versus how much they'll change the game, we'll have to wait and see. Even with the monumental shift in expectations between the two titles, they didn't buckle under pressure here. They took their time with Silksong, and the wait was worth it, if frustrating at times. But it was clear they made the game they wanted to make. One with a similar foundation, but took many creative risks that deviated from the original. Might not be as consistent at the moment, but when it's firing on all cylinders, it's some of the most fun I've had with a game in some time. Wrapping up this video, I mentioned earlier I was curious why Team Cherry decided now was the time to release Silksong. After all, what they said, they could have kept going for years if they wanted to. What the answer to that question is, I don't know, but I have to know its timing coinciding with other games. Over the next few months, barring further delays, we have several games coming out after long, troubled development cycles. We're going to have to find some new games to joke about when it comes to delayed games. Compared to what Team Cherry called their development cycle as development heaven, I don't think the same could be said for others. Development hell through and through. Still several months off as of writing, but we have Grand Theft Auto 6 coming out in May of 2026. I've heard Silksong referred to as the GTA 6 of indie games. Not from a gameplay standpoint, but a cultural one. You know, developers far and wide are extra cautious releasing their game around Grand Theft Auto. Should they delay it further to a time window around your game's release? That would suck. It must have sucked for developers, indie or large studios, to have their game set for release, only for Silksong to get a 2-week window for its release date announcement. On the Metroidvania front, Metroid Prime 4 has a release date for December 2025 after a troubled development period. Now they're giving Samus a motorbike? Alright, don't really know what to think about that. On the survival horror front, Routine is coming out by the end of 2025, although there is no concrete release date. A title announced back in 2012 that went through several difficult periods. Financial difficulties, dissatisfaction, direction. Development that began with Unreal 3 will end up releasing on Unreal Engine 5. I remember watching a trailer of it back in the day going, cool, and thinking about it every once in a while. A nice surprise to see a few years back that they got back on schedule and see that it's finally coming out. October 2025 will finally see the release of Bloodlines 2, a title that went through 2 different studios, and the title I'm surprised didn't get outright cancelled. To be honest, I'm more curious with what happened behind the scenes with the change in studios than the final release. There's been whispers here and there, but there must have been some serious screw-ups along the way. I do plan on covering the game, but expectations aren't exactly high. While there's no current release date, with more information trickling out now, we may see the release of Judas in the near future. After BioShock Infinite, Ken Levine wanted to take his time and move things to a smaller scale. When I did my video on BioShock Infinite, I came across an interview where Ken Levine said if he could get paid to make games and not release them, he would. He hates the process of releasing games. Well, considering how long he's been working on Judas, he's done a pretty good job of getting paid to work on a game for a long time. Part of me wonders if Team Cherry was in the same boat when it came to releasing Silksong. These are but a few on the horizon. There are more, assuming no more delays. Does this bode well for other games with long development cycles finally seeing the light of day? All seems to come together when these things happen. What about Star Citizen? Okay, let's not get ahead of ourselves here. That's never going to happen. Or what about different forms of media? Well, maybe something like Winds of Winter. Thanks for watching. Leave a like and your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe to the channel if you have not done so. Special shout out to the Boulder Punchers who give extra support to the channel on Patreon or YouTube memberships. For those in the complete global saturation tier, American Boot, Flat Nagel. For those in the thank you for your patronage tier, Tom Terrible. For those in the now this is Boulder punching tier, Ethan, the Madman in Waco, James Warner, Cray, Korean characters that Vegas Pro doesn't want to display for whatever reason. I tried to make it work, I couldn't, but Natu is what it translates to. The original Narcissus Diet Thick Dew Neo Edition. For those in the Jill Sandwich tier, On Hell, Benji, Benny Winterdawn, BB F. and Bloxburg, Darkrod99, Extraordinary 2, Happy Tunes, Logan Lepin, Mad Morpheus Gaming, Michael Walters, Nico Perro, Sam Jones, Squid Vicious, Will Han, and Zin. And now for the post-video Q&A. So those in the Jill Sandwich tier and above can ask questions for this. So starting with Flan Nagel, what are gameplay elements and or settings you haven't experienced in Metroidvanias that you would like to see? It'd be interesting to see more stealth elements integrated into Metroidvanias. Not like the Zero Suit section in Metroid Zero Mission. Something integrated from the ground up, as it's a core element. Something that gives you options like the game Mark of the Ninja, but expands it into a Metroidvania with its exploration. I'd be curious to see Metroidvanias blend elements with the immersive sim but stick to 2D. Games like Prey did have elements of the Metroidvania within with its progression, but I'd love to see something from a 2D perspective and pulling elements of the immersive sim. On that note of dimensions, I'd love to see more 3D Metroidvanias, something I brought up in my last video which was on Shadow Man. It's a bit of slim pickings. Batman Arkham Asylum, Metroid Prime series. There are others, and there are some in the indie space, but it's still mostly stuck in the 2D realm, and for good reason, it works. But I'd love to see more 3D integration of the Metroidvania. Still feels like untapped potential. So thank you for your question there, Flan Nagel. From Extraordinary 2, are there any indie games you are excited for that are coming out soon? Also, have you heard about Unicorn Samurai? Yes, I have heard about Unicorn Samurai. It does look intriguing. This question about upcoming indie games is good timing on your part, Extraordinary 2, because recently I sat down and wishlisted a bunch of upcoming indie survival horror titles. Some coming soon, some 2026, some without release dates. So there's what to have: Elisa the Parting, which is a sequel to Elisa, Be Crowned, Departure of Darkness, Echoes of the Living, Flesh Made Fear, Ground Zero, Holston, Jungle Rot, Liminal Point, No Vacation for an Executioner, Phase Zero, Pulsebreaker, Routine, which I did bring up shortly before here, Scarlet Lake, Tenebris, Somnia, The Bagman, and Tormented Souls 2. Those are some recent additions to the Steam wishlist. I found sites like survivalhorrors.com, that's plural with an S at the end of horror, have been great to find information about upcoming releases in the genre all in one spot. So shout out to those who run that site. It's been a godsend for that. So thanks for the question again, Extraordinary 2. From Happy Tunes, what other indie games do you want another sequel? So it came up in one of the questions earlier here. I'd love to see a sequel to Mark of the Ninja, although that's well over a decade, I think, at this point. Wow. I'd love to see a Blasphemous 3. Feels like there's still enough of that world to explore. I'm curious what Frictional Games does after Amnesia the Bunker, as that was one of the best survival horror games in years. I do hope they focus more on the gameplay heavy side as opposed to narrative, because there is that. They did a fantastic job with the Bunker. I'm curious to see if there will be a sequel to Conscript, maybe something that takes place during World War II. Crow Country would be interesting to see where they go with next. Control Alt Ego, which is one of the best immersive sims I've played in years. Love to see that follow up. Something more recent, there was Heartworm. Of course, look forward to see what Team Cherry would put out beyond Silksong, although I'm guessing with timing we won't be seeing anything soon on that front. And I'd be curious to see if they stick to this world or if they try something new altogether. What else? There was Hollow Body was a good one I'd like to see more of. Despite how the second game wraps up, and it's been, I think, well over a decade at this point, Hotline Miami. Signalis, maybe not a sequel per se, but more what the team comes up with next. I'd say that's the case for several of these, is more, maybe not per se a direct sequel, but something these small teams put out. Trepang 2, which, no, it's not, there wasn't a Trepang 1, there's a game that's just called Trepang 2, which is like a spiritual successor to Fear. It came out in 2023, that was really good, love to see more of. They're working on something else at the moment, but Weird West, I felt still had plenty of mileage in what they could do with that setting and how it played. Faith the Unholy Trinity, from what I understand, they are doing more for that, I think. I'm sure I missed others, but that feels pretty good as far as the list goes at the moment. So thanks again, Happy Tunes, and everyone for the questions. If you want to receive early access to videos, be featured in the credits, receive periodic updates, and more, do consider joining as a patron. Or if not monthly, supporting the channel with a one-time donation through Ko-fi and a super thanks. Check the pinned comment and description if you're interested. For upcoming videos, do expect more coverage on new releases. As of writing, Silent Hill F is around the corner, Bloodlines 2 is, same with Tormented Souls 2, but I've still got more out there, older titles to look at, and I think that you'll enjoy. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next video. And get good.